Welcome to Beautifully Built, the podcast where we design more than spaces. We design lives that are big, bold, and beautifully built. I'm your host, Karen Otis-Webb, architect, author, and unapologetic life builder, forever curious about building with purpose, passion, and personal vision. This podcast is about the design of your life. Messy, meaningful, raw, and real. From relationships and reinvention to business, purpose, and everything in between. We're stripping it down to what really matters. You'll get the grit and the grace, the vision and the vulnerability, because a life worth living isn't found, it's built. Welcome back, everyone. Today's guest is Mark Steven Porro. He is a New Jersey native. He earned an industrial design degree from the Ohio State University. And after years of agency work, his love of acting led him to Hollywood, where he appeared in dozens of TV, film, and stage productions. He also spent his 28 years in Tinseltown entrepreneuring and started several nonprofit companies. Today, the reason we have him here is he has written an amazing book. He is an award-winning designer, writer, director, and now a best-selling award-winning author. He's written lots of jokes, several screenplays, and one award-winning short film, A Cup of Tea on the Commode. It is a story that he has written. It's a sad, sweet, funny debut memoir. It chronicles his multitasking adventures of filling his mother's last years with love, laughter, and joy. Though not always successful, he came pretty darn close. I have to tell you, it is wonderful to have you, Mark. I read your book. So originally I had heard about you, but I hadn't read the book yet. And we went ahead and coordinated this interview. And then I read your book and I read it in one sitting. I could not put it down. I'm not even kidding you.
I haven't even done that.
Right. I could not put it down. So we're going to get into all of it. And for the listeners, Mark has such a unique way of taking a story that is so profoundly sweet, tender, but putting such humor into it that you don't know if you're crying or laughing or both. Anyway, so it's wonderful to have you, Mark.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I want to clarify one thing in my bio. None of those nonprofits were intended to be nonprofit.
Oops. I see. Got it.
So, I learned, I
didn't
say I failed at each one, but I learned less. And then I took what I learned and then attributed to the next adventure. So they were all good and they all primed me actually for taking care of mom.
Right. So let's kind of start with, so you grew up in a family, 6 kids, right?
Right. Yeah,
And
I
you are
had 5 siblings, 2 older brothers, 2 older sisters, and 1 younger sister.
Okay. And you were living in LA and mom was still in New Jersey. Is that right? When the book kind of begins. So there's, I have like a list of little tidbits I want to hit upon, but let's start with when you got, the phone call that mom was not doing well, and how old was she and what was that like?
Well, so at the time I was living in LA, I had a snack food business that my brother and I started actually to honor my dad in a snack invention that he created. And my acting career was kind of on the wane because I was in my mid-50s. And so that wasn't keeping me all that busy. And then when I got this call, my mother at that time was living in the house we all grew up in New Jersey. And my brother pretty much said she was on her deathbed. There was no medical reason that we knew of, anything other than maybe depression. But she just I think she just turned 89. And we had people living in the house that were overseeing household duties. They weren't doing any caregiving at that time, or at least before this incident. We did have someone helping with her personal care. And again, she wasn't there full time. She was there in the morning and evenings. But I think my mom looked around at her life and said, boy, if this is it, I'm out of here because it's not filled with love. And she wasn't very happy. And so she, I think, willed herself to leave this earth. So that was I think what really sparked me was my brother said the doctors cut off all meds and food and called hospice.
And that's usually, the beginning of the end, right?
It's not a happy ending, right? And then 14 years earlier, we called hospice for my dad, and 2 days later he died. So right away, it's like, get home. So we get home, and mom is pretty much non-responsive in bed. And the hospice nurse was there assessing her patient and trying to teach the person that was taking care of her personally how to do certain things, because certain things were being neglected. So my young sister, I hung out with hospice because we wanted to learn how to take care of our mother as best we could for as long as she wanted to be here, because we really wanted to be hands-on and show her that, we do love her and we want her to hang out a little bit longer.
Right, right.
Yeah, so that was, I think, really important, because my mother, I think, sensed that love was back in her home. And all my siblings were there, and we all partook in some way. But DC and I were really hands-on, and then we taught the tips and tricks that we learned from hospice. I mean, hospice was great. They were very generous. And we taught those to our other siblings. And so we always had someone there in the room with her and taking care of her. And I think she sensed that. And after a few weeks, she snapped out of it.
So let's talk about that. So share with everyone the, if you could, the pumpkin pie, because that's sort of when she snaps out of it, right? Like during that initial time. And I have to start by saying, you take your cue from hospice, or the nurses are telling you what to do, et cetera. And I know personally, when my mom, near the end of my mom's life, that feeling of love and being taken care of is really everything. And without that, they do lose a lot of that will to stay with us. But go ahead and tell us about this pumpkin pie.
Well, we discovered it because at this point, it was probably maybe 3 weeks in, and we had a steady parade of hospice nurses. So almost a different one every day would come in. The lead one would always check in, and she was great. We had the directive from the supervisor. And when we saw some of these hospice nurses kind of bending the rules a little bit, we would greet them at the front door, show them the directive, make sure they read it, and then introduce them to our mother. And at this point, mom did not talk at all, hasn't spoken now, I guess, around 3 weeks. She would open her eyes very rarely, but she just looked at a corner of the room. She didn't connect with any of us. She did respond a little bit to touch. But this one day, this one nurse came in, and she kind of glanced at the directive, didn't really read it, and marched right into my mother's room, leaned over the bed and said, "Genevieve, are you hungry?" And my mother's
even though the directive was no food at all, right? Okay.
She just didn't care. And apparently she had some experience with these things with the kids or whatever. I don't know. But my mother's eyes shot open like a dinner bell rang. And then this lady looked at us, and she accused us of trying to starve our mother to death. And so we certainly took some exception to that. Yeah. So she called her supervisor, and the supervisor said, "No, you're not supposed to feed them. Please leave. You broke the rules." But now I'm thinking, because mom opened her eyes, that maybe the original assessment was wrong, and we were in fact starving her to death. So I was kind of racked with guilt, and I went into her room, and I leaned in and I said, "Mom, are you hungry?" And she opened her eyes, and then she spoke for the first time. And she said, "What do you got?" And I said, "Well, anything you want." And she said, "Well, how about some pumpkin pie?" And it's March. It's not really pumpkin pie season. And I'm not sure where she got that idea. But my brother, who lived locally, was in the living room. So I asked him to go out and take on the challenge. And he came back within probably 30 minutes with 2 fresh pumpkin pies. I don't know where he got them. I don't know if he baked them himself or whatever. But they were very important. And so I gave mom a spoonful. And again, this is her first food in weeks. And she spit out the first spoonful. And I said, "Well, that didn't go so well. So let's try another one." So the second one went very well. And she ended up downing half that pie. And she was awake. Her eyes were bright. She was awake. The color came back in her face. She's sitting up, and it was fabulous. And the next day, she polished off the other half. And the next day, I think she polished off the full pumpkin pie.
Wow.
And then she moved on to sherbet. So she went on to sherbet, and she was eating about 8 bowls of sherbet a day. And we're like, she may be riding the most continuous sugar high, but she was awake. And I knew she was awake and back because she hit me with the guilt trip, which they say that Jewish mothers invented guilt tripping, but Catholic mothers perfected it. And my mom was one of the best. So I hadn't been there for several months. I kept in touch with phone calls and stuff, but I didn't like the people that were in the house. And my mother was kind of I called her Archie Bunker. She was this grumpy old lady. So I didn't like being around her all that much. And so she hit me with, "Boy, I haven't seen you in a long while."
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
There's that guilt.
And of course, I'm feeling terrible. And I had no really good excuse because, boy, if she passed anywhere around that time frame, I would probably still be in therapy.
Right,
So I'm
right.
so glad she woke up, and I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to make up for it.
So when did you decide? First of all, I love your mom's sense of humor. You capture those moments so beautifully in your book because they're subtle and they're intimate, and yet you can just see her personality through them. And what's beautiful about the book is that at the beginning it starts out really with her not interacting at all, like you said, just kind of eyes closed, not really there. But you really did bring her back to life. And so give us an idea. It started out thinking you had days or weeks, right? Because
Yeah.
hospice is there. So when did you make the decision, I'm going to really be here to take care of her? And how long did that last for?
Well, so I stayed there for several weeks. This all started maybe the first week of February. And I may have stayed till May. I knew hospice was going to be there, at least in New Jersey, when they're contracted to stay 6 months if the patient lasts that long. So I knew the hospice was going to be there till July. And when I felt she was in pretty good shape and hospice was still going to be there, because those people who I felt had some part to do with her wanting to leave were still going to be there, present in the house, because that was a little bit of I was very lucky, I think, with all my siblings, but there was a little tension with my brother who hired these people. And so until I decided to move back, I couldn't say all that much other than, sharing my opinion. He would say, well, what are you going to do about it? I'm doing all the work here, and I live locally, and it's all on my shoulders. So I stayed for several weeks, and I learned what I could about caregiving from hospice and just doing it. So I had no children. I was never married, so my first kid was this 89-year-old woman.
And it
So
ended up
that was
being
kind of
years that she lived, correct?
yeah, the book, I say our adventures were 3.5 years. So I went back to LA and we kept in touch. And at that point, my brother bought iPads for her and I had it on my computer. So I kept in touch with her. We would FaceTime when I was in LA. And then I came back in the end of the summer. One of her grandchildren was getting married. And I came back and took care of her again for a couple of weeks. And when I was there, I usually told the people, take a vacation, because
Right.
we don't need you here. And during that trip, I got her all dolled up for the wedding. And this was her first outing since February. And she had a great time. And I grew up with three sisters with long hair. So I kind of knew how to take care of hair and dolling up my mom. And I learned a lot more than just, put the toilet seat down as a guy. And so I just loved pampering her. And she had a great time at the wedding. And she wanted to get out of, at this point, she was still, bedridden and in a wheelchair. So she couldn't get out of the wheelchair. But she tried to dance on that dance floor. And so we had to take turns spinning her around in the wheelchair. But she had a great time. And during that trip, I asked her if she wanted me to come back, because I knew at that point, to maintain this level, which I thought was a good quality of life, I had to play a part in it. So part of that was my brother's comment, which was valid, and getting my mom's permission, and also the trust of all my siblings. So once she said yes to that, I moved back later that year. And again, I wasn't planning on taking the 24/7 over. I was supervising, and me being in the house kind of helped keep an eye on everybody.
Right, right.
But eventually I took it all over, and that's when the fun really began.
Right. So before we get to when the fun began, you called the people upstairs that were kind of helping with household chores, and I say that very, lightly because they really weren't. You call them Tweedledee and Tweedledum.
For legal
And
reasons.
I see. Oh, okay, very good. Yeah, it sounds so horrible. I mean, and that part, it's so sad that people can't somehow. But what broke my heart about that was just that, they stopped seeing your mom as a person. They just didn't really care for her as a person.
Yeah.
And they sounded like a nightmare. The stories that you share. So for the listeners, the stories you share are just, you just want to swat them back because those people were just not good to her. And that made me sad. Difference then. What a striking difference to then have you care for her. And that is why the fun began. So share a few of the stories, if you don't mind. I love so many of them, but let's talk for a minute about the chapter called Wiping Butts Causes Amnesia,
Well,
because
it's the question, does it?
does
And
it,
so,
right? Does
yeah,
it cause amnesia?
I don't want to ruin the ending, but the ending is discussed in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my mother did suffer from a little bit of dementia.
Mm-hmm.
And so early on, she would have some visions that were quite interesting. Some were beautiful. The recurring one of the parade of children was just, I thought, a beautiful vision.
Yeah,
And that's why I opened the book with it, because that was the
right.
one that she saw quite often.
She
And
did.
it was
Okay.
very vivid, and I just went with it, because I thought it was beautiful. About maybe 4 months in of me, I gave her sponge baths twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. And once we got a commode set up bedside, I would have to wipe her butt when she was finished.
Mm-hmm.
So about 4 months in, I come in the morning, and she looks at me and she says, "So what is it I call you?" And I said, "You're kidding, right?" She goes, I said, "Name your kids." And she says, "Laurel, Michael, Carol, David, DC." And stumped, absolutely stumped. I said, "Mark." And she says, "Oh, Mark. Mark with a K?" I said, "Yeah, Mark with a K. You named me, and I'm your favorite son." And she says, "I don't have favorites." And I
Oh
said,
God.
"Well, you have a favorite to forget." So I came to the conclusion and did some research on it, of course, that does wiping butt cause amnesia? Because I'm the only one wiping her butt on a consistent basis. And I'm the
Right.
only one she forgot. So instead of getting angry about it, and this is where the humor comes in, and luckily both of
Yes.
my parents were very funny, and they both passed it down to their kids. I wrote my name in big block letters and taped it to the ceiling, so she had a visual aid. And so when I would greet her in the morning, she would be lying in bed. And so I'd say, "Good morning." And she'd say, "Good morning." And then her eyes would dart up to the ceiling for help. And then she'd come back and very proudly say, "Mark." And then it became a game. Sometimes I'd say, "You peeked." And she goes, "No, I didn't." I said, and
Yes, you did.
it was very funny. So she did remember me after a while. But I do have scientific proof that I think it does, in fact, cause amnesia.
Interesting. Very interesting. I loved that story though, because, here you are, and it's so easy for us to say, okay, yeah, you took care of your mom, you gave her sponge baths, you had to wipe her, etc. But it's very trying. I'm sure it tries your patience. It can be frustrating. You pretty much put your life on hold to care for her. And then I could see where that would feel hurtful or frustrating, but you chose to go with humor. And it kind of is what weaves its way through the whole book. Which I found so delightful. And what I will say is that the biggest gift reading it to me was, so my mom near the end was not being well cared for, and I basically we had lived in California. I went there, scooped her up, moved her with me and my husband to Arizona, and brought her back to life. There's a lot of what you talk about that I completely understood. It resonated for me. Unfortunately, I only had 9 months with her as opposed to those years you had, but to be able to look back at those now and see the little humorous moments, which I really couldn't. It's been 3 years since she's passed, but it's still just, it's such a sad, heartbreaking thing for me that I couldn't really even stop to think about all those little funny incidents. And your book really helped me do that. It really helped me think to those little things and just laugh out loud at some of the humor in it. So I
Yeah.
love that.
Well, it helps. I think if you go in and just say, "Listen, they're still my parent. I love them." I don't want to say love them to death, but yeah, they're a little slower. They may not be 100%, but they deserved love and dignity and certainly patience. And this whole adventure taught me unconditional love because I had no children and I was never married. So this was the thing where it was like, okay, her life is literally in my hands and I have a choice of how I want to deal with that. And so
Right.
luckily, again, humor was always present in our house. There was a lot of tension at times because you have six
Hmm.
kids and two very stubborn, independent parents that both worked full time. So the humor was just fabulous. And with my dad, too, near the end, we had some of the funniest moments.
Hmm.
And I was privy, wasn't originally going to be a book. I just had I guess, a history of recording family history. And since I was privy to all these lovely moments and some really special conversations, and her visions, I didn't want my siblings to miss out on this. So I just started recording it for family.
Right.
And then a friend of mine was around the same age, was going through the same thing with her dad. And I shared what I learned from hospice and some of the things I was doing. And she seemed to get some benefit out of it. And that's when I started thinking maybe a book. Because for my history in Hollywood, I was writing movies and things like that. So I look at everything, okay, how can I put it on the screen? Mm-hmm. And so that's my original intent. And it's funny because now I'm working on the screenplay for it.
Oh, wow. That would
but
be
the idea
tremendous.
is I wanted to make it very visual so people really could get in there and really experience some of the stuff that I was experiencing.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, to the point that, so I told you I read this book in one sitting, and I had been reading it on my Kindle, etc. I put it onto my computer on that same day, like later on in the day, because I got tired of reading it so small because I'm reading 300 and some pages in a day. And so I put it on the computer. So I'm sitting in my home office reading, and it's getting late. Usually I kind of wrap up work around 4:30 or 5. And my husband walks in. I'm just locked in reading this. It's approaching 6 p.m., almost 7 p.m. And he comes walking in, and he's going to ask me, what do you want to do for dinner? We need to make a salad. I'm usually the salad person. So he comes in and he looks at me, and I am tears. I mean, I'm not even kidding you. Tears are falling onto my desk. I am bawling like the big ugly cry. And he looks at me, he's like, "Oh my God, what happened?"
I'm reading
I'm reading the best story ever. I can't deal with the salad. I need to finish reading. It was that powerful though. And I think it was that powerful because of all the little moments you shared. It really became, you did feel like you were there. You did. I felt the relationship you had with your mother, and it was, just exquisite because it was real. There are times she was grumpy. There are times, it tried your patience, but it was so real and beautiful. Share, if you could, the story of the title of the book. And then the one other thing I really want you to share is where you came up with this Day of Beauty, which was just, a stunning and such a thoughtful thing to do.
Well, thank you. So my mother's favorite beverage was a cup of hot tea, skim milk, no sugar. Sometimes Mother Nature took a little longer than was comfortable for either one of us on the commode. So the first thing in the morning, get her on the commode before the sponge bath. And so kind of as a joke, I said, "Would you like a cup of tea while we're waiting?" And she said, "Sure." So I made her a cup of tea, and it became a hit. And so it's funny because the subtitle is My Multitasking Adventures of Caring for Mom and How I Survived to Tell the Tale. So my mother was also a multitasker. So while she was on the commode, she enjoyed a nice cup of tea. We had a number of rituals. So that became our morning ritual, in addition to many of the other things. On the Day of Beauty, she worked full time. She had the 6 kids, but she treated herself once a week to a trip to the beauty parlor. And whenever she would visit me in LA, I took her to my friend Stanley's place in Beverly Hills, and she got the movie star treatment. And I knew she loved that. And I don't know when the last time she was at a beauty salon or had her hair done in a special way or anything. But at this point, her hair was long, beautiful white mane of hair. Wow. Before that, I grew up with her, and she had these, she would do the perms and perms and sets and stuff. And then when she got her Bijan frise, they seemed to match with the tight white curls.
Yes.
Yeah. So now it was just beautiful long again, like she had in her, I guess, even up to having children. So I said, we're going to do something special here. And I wanted to bring that salon treatment home. In addition to the sponge bath. So she's on the commode. So I originally scheduled it for Sunday, but she was a good Catholic girl and said, "No, we can't do that. We got to move it." So to avoid a trip to hell, we moved it to Saturday. And so while she sat on the commode, I soaked her feet in Epsom salts, and I shampooed and rinsed her hair. And then I got her to the bed, and I gave her a full body massage and coated her with lotion, because as we get older, boy, the skin gets really itchy. And then gave her a fresh diaper. Another thing I did before I created the Day of Beauty was I bought her a new wardrobe. I didn't want my mom looking like an old lady or smelling like an old lady. So that's why she got the 2 sponge baths in a day. And So I bought her these new night or day dresses that were lovely. If you want to cheer anybody up at any age, a new wardrobe will kind of do that. And so she picked out what wardrobe she wanted, and I put her in the wheelchair. And that was, again, one of our rituals I forget about. When I stood her up, I would say morning hug, because she would wrap her arms around me to help her get up. And I would put my hands underneath her armpits and lift her up and say morning hug. So we hugged each other. And that, again, was a morning ritual, because you don't think about these things, how big a deal it is. But boy, as they get older, and especially if they're bedridden, hugs are really difficult. If they're not painful, they're really hard to do. So if they can stand on their feet and you give them it was just a beautiful thing. And neither of us wanted to let go. And then I would put her in the wheelchair. That would blow dry her hair, and then put it in a ponytail generally. Once in a while I would braid it, because again, I learned from my sisters how to braid hair. And then she had beautiful long nails. She was a hand model back in her late teens, early 20s. And so I gave her a manicure. I had to be very careful. Those things were like the crown jewels for her. So I had to be very careful with that. And then I finished it off with a bright red lipstick to match her nails. And again, I didn't think that, it was a nice thing to do. And it was something that we did in Beverly Hills. And growing up, I tried to paint her nails and stuff as a kid. So I'm wheeling her into the kitchen for breakfast, and we pass a big mirror in the dining room. And I park her in front of that mirror, and she's just gaga. And I lean in and I say, "Who's that pretty girl?" And she just beamed. And that's when I realized the power of this little gesture, because it made me realize that wanting to feel pretty doesn't end with age. It doesn't fade. And at that point, she's 90, and it was a beautiful thing. So I parked her in front of that mirror every day and asked that same question. And I wanted her to know that she was, not only is she beautiful, but I certainly thought she was beautiful. And it was infectious. Everybody that saw her saw how well she was cared for, and they got a kick out of it. And it was lovely. So it was a really good lesson for me. I may have gotten more out of it than she did. But again, I think that, being a son doing this stuff, it took, let's say, maybe more the romantic approach to it.
Yeah. I mean, what's so interesting is that usually the caregiving like that lands on the daughters. And I loved how not only did you just say, doesn't matter, I'm going to do it, but the thought processes that you had were so unique. Like, to think that a day of beauty would be that meaningful. I mean, as a woman, we love that. I mean, we know that inherently. If we don't look good, we don't feel good, and the way you kind of tapped into what she might need just as a human being, kind of giving her back her dignity, treating her with compassion. I mean, it just brings tears to me. So it was just such a touching story. So yeah, and I encourage everybody to read it, because it's one of those that, like, I know it will stick with me. It will be one of those I think back on often. Tell me what you think it taught you, because I know that, I mean, obviously you gave so much to her, but with her humor or with that time that most of us don't get with our parents, sometimes they go quickly. And what do you feel like what was the gift for you?
Well, definitely I learned what unconditional love really is. Until you have someone's life in your hands, I think and also, so my MO up to that point was, if I got bored and it was in my career, with my dating life and stuff, I moved on. It was like, life's too short, you got to do this. Well, there was going to be no moving on here. So that was a commitment, and that was very interesting. So you had to learn patience, certainly humor. But, it's interesting. So years earlier, my mother and father had a contentious few years. They were Catholics, and they were, till death did they part, no matter how tense it got. And there were some money issues and stuff throughout our lives. But when my dad got heart disease, and that's a real horrible, it may be different now, but back then, this was in the 90s, it was a horrible, slow death. And he didn't want to be in the hospital. And my mother said, "I'm with you here." And they became a team for his last years. And it was very selfless and heroic on her end. And, I didn't think about that because both of my parents really led by example. We watched them do the right thing growing up. They didn't teach us or lecture us about certain things. We just saw the right thing being done every day. And so this was, again, my mother doing the right thing. And I didn't really think about that until Well, I'm writing the next book is focusing more on my dad, and I think that came up through that. And I'm thinking, boy, she really set the example without telling it. This is what I'm
Right.
doing because I'm a good wife. She just said this is the right thing to do, and so that really, I guess, was in my DNA. Because I didn't think of this as being anything special. People go, "Oh, you're a hero" and stuff. No, it's the right thing to do. How long did they put up with us? It's
Right.
usually
Right.
18 years, sometimes a lot longer. And again, they do deserve their dignity and the respect and the patience and all that stuff that I think comes into play, especially as a parent. And I was kind of as a playing parent at that point.
Right.
So that was very important. And another revelation that I had after the book. So I couldn't write the book for a couple of years. It wasn't actually till I moved to France. I moved to France a couple of years after Mom passed. I just ruined the ending of the book.
Wow.
Cut that
We
out. Let's
know.
cut that
Yeah,
out.
that's okay. Well,
Because
no,
I
I mean,
needed,
you expect that anyway. You expect that it will
yeah,
happen. You know that. Yeah.
yeah.
Going into the book. Yeah.
Yeah. So I needed emotional distance as well as actually physical distance. And so I wrote the book and it was released on Mother's Day. And I couldn't do the audio book, even though I had 28 years of acting experience. I
Really.
would get very emotional, even in non-emotional scenes. And I knew I couldn't do it for a while. So six
Right.
months later, I built a studio here and I was recording it. But when I had that distance, again, 6 months, I'm looking at it with fresh eyes. And I came up with this, which I thought was really, really interesting. So if you read the story, it sounds like I went back and rescued my mother, right? And in a sense, I did.
Right. You
I did.
did. You did.
But
Hmm.
upon reflection, I'm thinking
Hmm.
that maybe Mom rescued me.
Hmm.
Because at that point, I've had a pretty adventurous life, did a lot of good things, but nothing really special. And
Hmm.
this was an opportunity to really step up and do something special. And my mother, whether she was conscious of it or not, gave me that opportunity. And luckily,
Yeah.
I was smart enough to take it on. And and it helps so much in, let's say, the grieving and saying goodbye to her, because it was a beautiful way for her to go.
Hmm.
And that helped
Hmm.
me. And I think it helped my siblings and stuff to say goodbye, because she was uh, I would think her passing, and I think my dad's too, was like the envy of others, because
I think you're right.
they
Yeah.
died in their beds. I was with
Yep.
both of them and a different sister for each, and so they're surrounded by love in their bed and very little pain, and yeah, it was lovely. So it certainly helped me say goodbye,
Hmm.
and so I think, yeah, that whole thing was just beautiful and a beautiful revelation. So
Yeah. She
I
she
thank
did
Mom
give you
every
the.
day.
Yeah, she did. And I love how you say that, because she did. She gave you the opportunity to do something remarkable,
Yeah,
really, something that was so meaningful, that not only to her but to you, and just to make her. I loved how it wasn't just about caring for her, taking care of her, doing the tasks, getting her food, changing a diaper, etc. It was about making her life as beautiful as you could,
yeah,
for however long you could.
yeah.
So
What?
thank you for that.
Oh,
It's
you're
a
welcome.
beautiful story. Yeah.
Well, I told her, so once I got her permission, I said, okay, if we do this, we're going to have fun. And she was game. And I said, one of my goals was to make her laugh at least once a day. And she ended up making me laugh quite a bit too. So I think if you go in with that attitude, it really helped
Hmm.
us, both of us. And yeah, so that's why I call it my adventures, because it wasn't, it's emotionally and physically and mentally tough, but overall it was a gift. And that's why I like sharing the story, because I hopefully will inspire other people to find the joy in it and enjoy some of the lovely things that I got to enjoy.
Yeah, beautiful. I think this world, we're getting to where we have a lot of elderly. I know that, just the population has changed, and because we live longer, we have so many more elderly people, but how beautiful to give them that grace. So Thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. I encourage everyone to go out and get the book, Cup of Tea on the Commode. It will stick with you. So, Mark, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for sharing your story. Your mom sounds like she was a beautiful person.
She was a kick. Yes. And so thank you. So by sharing this story, it keeps my mom in the present. So that is your gift to me. So thank you.
Nice. Very nice. I love that. All right. Well, thank you. And then if people want,
If they Google a cup of tea on the commode, we're everywhere, from Amazon and Facebook and Instagram and even some TikTok. I have a YouTube channel with a lot of funny videos on it. But the book is in print, large print, ebook, and also the audiobook is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, a lot of online stores, and some brick and mortars around the States.
Okay.
And soon it will be translated in Chinese and Korean. So we just sold those
wow,
foreign rights.
nice.
So we're
Very
getting out
nice.
to the world as well, which would be very cool.
Very, very cool. I love it. Well, thank you very much, and wonderful talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you.